Hello, everybody. I'm Cher Gilmore, and I'm group leader of the Santa Clarita chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, and also a member of the Sierra Club.
And I'm Sandra Cattell, and I'm with the Sierra Club. I'm a member of the Fracking committee through the Angeles chapter. I'm on the Angeles chapter executive committee, and I'm also part of the state conservation committee. Actually, California and Nevada Conservation Committee. So I get to start out, and I thought I'd talk, give a little bit of equal time here because I've been listening to a lot of ads on the radio from the oil companies talking about how wonderful fracking is. And the Energy Independence California ads will tell you that domestic oil production is the key to energy independence, and they generate $6.7 billion in revenue. The loss would put schools and other services at risk, and of course, they give us a lot of jobs. So with that said, Cher and I are going to be telling you a little bit about this new technique well, not so new technique, but its use has been accelerating, and it's called fracking, or hydraulic fracturing, or acid fracking. So first I'm going to define what we're talking about. Hydraulic fracking is the process of drilling and injecting fluid into the ground at very high pressure in order to fracture shale rocks to release gas and natural gas. And up to 600 different chemicals are used in fracking fluid, including many toxins and carcinogens. Now, the other flip side of that is what we call acid fracking. And here in California, we have the California Monterey Shale Formation, and it's folded by seismic forces that make it most suitable to acidizing. There are two types of acidizing. There's matrix acidizing, which is a low pressure, where acids dissolve sediments and solids that inhibit the permeability of the rock. And there's also fractive acidizing, where they pump at high pressure. They pump in acid that will fracture and dissolve the sediments. Now, acid fracking uses both hydrochloric acid and hydrofluoric acid, among other chemicals. And hydrofluoric acid is very important to mention because it is an acute poison. The danger is that the vapor, or the acid vaporizes, and it can be released during transportation, mixing, injection, and is also found in its wastewater. Exposure can cause burns to your skin, eyes, respiratory system harm, organ damage, and even death. The U.S. Center for Disease Control considers hydrofluoric acid one of the most dangerous industrial chemicals. I'm just going to give you a very quick thing. We do not have fracking here in Santa Clarita, and the closest actual fracking that we have is in Inglewood. And there have been a lot of activity going on there.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of reasons to ban acidizing and fracking, and one of the most important, in my view, is the fact that it adds to global warming. And it does that by encouraging increased oil production, and that puts more carbon emissions in the air, and that exacerbates global warming. So scientists have told us that if we want to keep a livable planet, we have to keep the global average temperature increase to less than 2 degrees Celsius. Now, right now, we are almost at 1 degree Celsius increase in average global temperature, and we see some of the disasters that are occurring. We see the droughts in California. We see the sea level rising, the ice caps melting. Imagine what it's going to be like when it's double the increase that we have now. So scientists tell us if we want to keep below that 2% Celsius 2 degrees Celsius increase, we have to keep most of the fossil fuels that are in the ground now there. We have 5 times more reserves in oil than we can burn safely. So it's a serious problem. We've got to stop doing that. The second problem and reason to ban fracking and acidizing is that both processes use a tremendous amount of fresh, local sourced water. Fracking uses 500,000 to 3 million gallons per well per fracking job. And there are over 1,000 wells that have been fracked in California. That's a lot of water. I think our farmers would do better with that water than fracking wells. Another reason to ban it is that studies have shown that the toxic chemicals can leach into and contaminate groundwater, soil, and air where fracking is done. And you can see evidence of that in the documentaries Gasland 1 and 2 as well. And I find that this is very scary given the dangerousness of the chemicals that they're using. And related to that, there's no safe place to dispose of the contaminated wastewater. Some of it's re-injected deep into the ground, but a lot of it is just left into tailing ponds or toxic ponds where it can leak into the water table and also poison the local wildlife. Here's a tailings pipe with toxic chemicals going into the pond. An aerial view of the muck. Tar ponds in Alberta, Canada. Pretty bad. Fracking has also been shown to trigger earthquakes in the Midwest and also here in Southern California. In fact, in the Midwest, there has been a 2,400% increase in small earthquakes since fracking began. It's a serious problem, and especially for us in California, who are on all these faults. Also, both industrial processes destroy the beauty and tranquility of the environment. Here's some examples of that. That's Baldwin Hills, where they are doing a lot of fracking, an aerial view. Inglewood. Wouldn't that be a great view to see out of your front window? More Baldwin Hills fracking. Do we want our beautiful California coastline to look like that? Tourism is a big industry in California, and I don't think we want to ruin it by fracking along the coast. Also, retrieving fossil fuels creates far fewer jobs, even though the claim is that we have to have the jobs, we have to do this fracking so that we can have the jobs. It actually creates fewer jobs than renewable energy. In fact, the ratio is approximately 6 to 1. 6 renewable energy jobs can be created while 1 job in fossil fuels. Also, what most people don't know at this point is, I think you've probably heard of the 15 billion gallons of oil that's supposed to be in the Monterey Shale. Have you heard about that? Well, just recently, the U.S. Energy Information Administration reduced that estimate of retrievable oil by about 96%. The estimate went from 15 billion barrels to about 900 million barrels of retrievable oil, which is about 1 month's worth for the U.S. and 6 days of global use. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And actually, there have been studies that show that fossil fuels are not necessary to meet our energy needs. There's a study by Stanford researcher Mark Jacobson and UC Davis researcher Mark DeLucci, the studies show that we can get 100% of our energy needs met using renewable resources, mainly wind and solar, within 20 to 40 years using today's technology without increasing current energy expenditures. I think that's great news. So with all of these issues regarding fracking and acidizing, there is really no reason to continue fracking and using fossil fuels, and every reason to stop. Sandra.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I wanted to also mention that we've become a great oil exporter, right? Mm-hmm. So we are producing not just for our own needs, but we are producing for the financial benefits of companies. Okay, so about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, I read the AQMD, the Air Quality Management District's report that told me that there had been acidizing of 9 wells in Placerita Canyon. Not being really well versed in exactly what that meant, I went to the city council meeting and said, you know what, I'm really nervous. What is this all about? And I asked them to look into this and into the possibility of fracking here in Santa Clarita. And I have to tell you that Environmental Services was on it the next day. And they had contact with Dogger, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, the Newhall Water Company, and many other agencies, and they determined that no fracturing was going on. And I felt real good about that, but I always like to do my own research. So I decided to go talk with Berry Petroleum. And the first thing I found out that they've changed companies. They're now Lynn Energy. They were acquired by Lynn. And I met with the production foreman. We do not have fracturing here in Santa Clarita. They have been using steam-assisted extraction. And the type of steam extraction they use is steam flooding. It's a low-pressure steam-assisted extraction method which essentially warms the oil to make the extraction easier, with occasional cyclic steam stimulation, which is also a low pressure. Now, the steam is a byproduct of the cogeneration plant that they run, but they also have additional steam generators if needed. By the way, in that method, no additional gases are produced other than would be produced if they just had an oil well pumping oil. The steam and other water come up with the oil. After the oil is taken out, the produced water, that's what they call the water that's left, is filtered, treated, and tested. They have a tiered level of treatment, and I talked to them about that extensively. It's then put back into the ground in water injection wells going down 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Now, these injection wells, these are the wells that were acidized because our hard water clogs the central pipe of the injection well. Now, to do that, they use a mud mixture that does have a 12% hydrochloric acid and a 3% hydrofluoric acid. It is mixed elsewhere and then trucked in when needed and used at low pressure. However, the reality is we still have the use of hydrofluoric acid. The foreman told me that the percentages had to be very carefully calculated to scale the well without any remaining hydrochloric acid and hydrofluoric acid. And the reason it was explained this way is, he said, think about using vinegar to get some hard water deposits off of a pipe. And when the pipe has been scaled, the liquid that's left is not vinegar anymore, it's rather inert, and you now have the residue from the calcification or mineralization. The reason he said they wanted to be very careful, he said, because it is not good to have the chemicals going into the ground because that would then come up with the next load of oil at some point. Would you like to continue?
Okay. Okay. All right, so you're probably aware that we have a law. It's a law now. It was a bill, SB 4, which was put out to regulate acidizing and fracking in California. There are quite a few limitations to this law. A few of them I think are pretty significant. The first one is that there are exceptions to full public disclosure for, quote, proprietary state trade secrets. I'm sorry. okay, proprietary trade secrets. And that means that they'll tell you what chemicals are there, but they won't tell you how much of any of the chemicals. Secondly, the groundwater monitoring is to be conducted by the oil company, which to me is kind of a classic case of the fox guarding the hen house. Also, permits can be denied on the basis of unreasonable risk, but how can unreasonable risk be proven if the chemicals and the amounts are not known and you can't find that out? So that seems odd. Also, no regulations of any kind could prevent leaks, and 6% of the wells leak immediately and 50% leak over 20 years, within 20 years. And then regulations are only as good as the regulators, and there's lots of oil money being used, sloshing around, to see that regulations and fines are minimal. For instance, the Western States Petroleum Association spent $2.5 million on lobbying in the first half of 2013 alone. And lastly, more studies really aren't needed because there are already plenty of independent studies showing the negative effects of fracking. And this is 3 examples. Duke has shown linked methane contamination to fracking. University of Texas has found elevated levels of lead close to natural gas extraction sites. Colorado School of Public Health has linked fracking to increased cancer risk and neurological and respiratory problems. So to finish this part, I want to read a quote from an article by Lauren Steiner. It says, she says, quote, regulations in SB 4 do nothing to actually make fracking safer. Instead, the flawed bill, now law, sets up a process for notification, disclosure, monitoring, and permitting, and simply calls for future regulations by other agencies and a scientific study. Telling someone when you're going to frack, where you're going to frack, and what chemicals you will use is like a murderer telling you he's going to shoot you on your front porch at noon tomorrow with an AK-47. At the end of the day, you're still dead. I thought that was a good summary of the bill. Okay.
And I'm going to follow up with some words from the Anti-Fracking Coalition. And this is the first half of the group on the coalition. The Sierra Club California and many other Sierra Club groups, as well as many other environmental groups, got together. And we've been talking about Senate Bill 4, which, while it was better than nothing, we feel is lacking. And I'm going to quote a letter that was sent, and here's some of it's a little bit abridged because there's way too much. While the legislature, through the passage of Senate Bill 4, has compelled the state to adopt regulations with some basic minimal guidelines specified, state law requires DOGGR to prevent, as far as possible, damage to life, health, property, and natural resources. Our organizations are united in the belief that DOGGR can only meet the legal mandate by imposing a moratorium on well stimulation. Industry is poised to rapidly expand its use of highly controversial well stimulation techniques to extract oil and gas throughout the state. Yet there is not a comprehensive science and knowledge base to assess the expected impacts to our state's health, water, air, climate, natural resources, environmental quality, seismically sensitive lands and communities, and the related social and environmental justice issues. The absence of science and reporting occurs in a context of a currently inadequate regulatory environment, including documentation and reporting, and thereby enforceable safeguards. Under Senate Bill 4, an emergency regulatory power granted for the interim period by that statute, there is the authority to implement the precautionary principle and put an immediate halt to well stimulation projects. We strongly urge a moratorium on all well stimulation and the immediate implementation and completion of an independent scientific review. Do you want to get the next group up there? Now, you see, all of these are environmental groups, and you probably say, oh yeah, those are environmental guys. But in 2012 and 2013, the AFL and the United Steelworkers and the United Mine Workers of America got together, and they sent letters to federal workplace agencies urging that they act to protect workers in the fracking industry. There had been an increase in injuries in the workplace due to the fracking. Now, the Steelworkers website still has many no fracking pics on its images page. So I found that very interesting. Organized labor also has a view on this.
Okay, so if you agree that you would like to see fracking and acidizing not come into our community, what can you do? What can any of us do? We can urge the City Council to impose a moratorium on acidizing and fracking until such time as it's proven to be completely and absolutely safe by independent studies. We can write letters to our City Councils, our county supervisors, and newspaper editors to counteract the propaganda and misinformation put out by the oil companies. We can attend candidate forums and find out where candidates stand on a moratorium on fracking and acidizing and let them know our views.
And
Tony? Yes. And we can join a local environmental group that's working on this issue, such as Citizens Climate Lobby or the Sierra Club. And if you're interested in either one of those groups, we'll be glad to give you some information after we're done. And here's a little final slide to make you smile. Can you read it?
It says, if we tell you what's in it, we have to kill you. If you don't tell me, how do I know it won't?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Oh,
Yeah.
by the
Are there
way,
any...
I forgot to mention, Cher said she was a member of the Sierra Club.
That's right.
And I'm also a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby. So.
That's right. We have overlapping interests.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
Well, let's give it a Cher.
Thank you very much.